Again, these are members of the Water Resources Advisory Panel that also were very instrumental in a lot of the work that was referenced throughout the throughout the conference. And so I will frame it that way. Mike Sousek with the Lower Elkhorn, a natural resource district. The reason we're here today and the Water Center is here today is because Ron Yoder mentioned he likes feedback, and Mike was definitely one to give feedback to Ron Yoder. And as a result of that, the journey, I think that spark initiated our journey here. So thank you, Mike, for that. That was always very good. Mark Broman is Executive Director of the Environmental Trust, Nebraska Environmental Trust, is another spark plug, and I reference that as a leader in that makes a lot of things happen. As his organization is a source of funding for a lot of the work that was referenced throughout the conference. And then I'll jump over, I'll leave you to last. Ryan Chapman with the NDEE. And that state agency, again, referenced throughout the conference and the work that organization does to just keep everybody honest and going. And I guess the touchstone for so much work, and I mean, that 10 parts per million, I guess, for nitrate is what drives so much work. And so the work, the regulatory community, I guess it's a state agency, but that federal driver, I mean, I hope you touch on that in your comments. And then the drinking water community. Marty Stange is here to represent that consumer and the public health community, and representing the consumer, that consumer. So I teed you guys up and how important it is, and we really want to hear from your thing. So I did give them some questions to consider on this panel. And so I guess any order, just start from one end, it doesn't really matter to me, whatever, volunteer. I wanted them to reflect on what is the most significant innovation, research, technology, or policy that you heard. Anyone want to go first?
There we go. Again, I'm Mark Broman with the Nebraska Environmental Trust. There were a lot of things I saw and heard about the last day and a half that were pretty innovative. You know, I wanted to mention first that I really feel the pain of Creighton. I'm from a very small town, Callaway, Nebraska, out in the middle of the edge of the Sand Hills in the middle of Custer County. And I know that water is a big deal in those small towns. When you raise rates, it causes a lot of problems. And I think there are a lot of communities that are going to go through the pain that Creighton's going through now. So I hope we can get on top of these things. But I think the one thing that really impressed me yesterday was Wade's presentation about the actual profit data and how the nitrogen application, how there's a point in time where you're applying nitrogen and it's costing you money, but your yields are not going up. And it was mentioned that bankers should be very interested in that. I know there are a lot of folks out there, unfortunately, that have to rely on their banker every spring to get operational funds. So I think working with the bankers and producers, getting that information out there, maybe collecting data like that in other areas of the state so that they know it's relevant. It's not just in one part of the state, it's all across the state, that there's data like that. And so that's the one thing that I came away from saying, boy, that's some interesting data. I guess in the back of my mind, it makes sense. But to see the data there and see that curve, it really hit home with me, and I really enjoyed Wade's comments.
Yeah, I'm Mike Sousek with the Lower Elkhorn NRD. I guess one of the major things that I'm encouraging Martha to do is continue her research on the public health aspect of things. We've been fighting this battle for 30, 40 years now. We've cried wolf so many times on nitrates. I don't think any producer, you bring it up and it's just the same old song and dance. Until we make this relevant, to the general public and public health, the things that are happening out in Pierce County, out in my district, the correlations being made between atrazine and nitrates, and I'm sure maybe it's some more health issues out there. I don't know. But Martha, thank you for the work you do. I've been talking with Ron about getting you more support and doing more research, but we got to make this relevant to the general public. Otherwise, it's not an issue at all.
Marty Stange with Hastings Utilities. I don't know that I represent every consumer or utility district out there, but wow, that was a lot of pressure. Yeah, that's true. I guess just one general comment about the conference was I wrote down so many one-line aha moments in just hearing from folks. But one thing that came to mind was, the whole idea of the economics and that. And I don't want to take from what Mark already said, but I thought that was pretty important. But I heard one comment was that people were using sprinkler irrigation for flood irrigation. And I thought, they were putting so much on with their sprinklers that they really hadn't taken advantage of the sprinkler irrigation system. And, we still see that out there, unfortunately. It's just that they use the technology to save time because they didn't have to set the tubes or change the gated pipe, but they're still putting away too much water where they actually have the technology that they could do that. But I think one of the innovative things that I'm glad to hear about is that, if we can start doing more with cover crops and those things, I really think, I know we hear this all the time, but we also heard about getting carbon in the soil, trying to control the management, trying to control the runoff and doing all those things. I mean, we need to really be looking at when you have a technology, what other things can you be doing with it? And I think we need to get this more holistic thing from that. So I was really glad to hear about the cover crop issues and so forth. Hopefully we'll hear a lot more about that in the future.
Brian Chapman, Department of Environment and Energy. I think we've come a long ways in the last 30, 40, 50 years from when the Clean Water Act was first enacted in the early 70s. We no longer have dead cattle floating down the river. So, that's a positive. But that's something, getting back to the people end of things, that's something that people could see and they didn't like it. The rivers are not on fire. And now we're dealing with that underground nitrate that you can't see, you can't smell it, you can't hear it. So, I think that adds another social dimension to this problem. And I think we've had some good ideas. I think the AEM data is kind of a game changer. We heard about that early yesterday. I hope to see more of that to come. I think there's a lot of uses of that data that we haven't even thought about yet. So we've heard all kinds of different BMPs, in-field practices, treatment technologies. Marty might have got excited on some of those this afternoon. So, there's a lot of research out there, but we have to get back to the people issue. We have to make them care. We have to make them want to use it. And we have to make it easy for them to use. And I think some of the following questions will hear more about that.
Great. Thank you so much. So it does come down to policy and behavior change. We talked about that. So what research is needed to inform policy?
Well, I think I'll go back to Wade's presentation. If we can get additional data on those profiles of profitability and nitrogen use, that's important. But I'll also echo what Mike said, and that is the health aspects. I think when you get some data and it clearly shows some of the health impacts, I think he's exactly right. People have hauled wood for so long that people kind of ignore it. But I think if we come up with some new data that people can understand and get that information out in the hands of the public, I think they will try to change their view on nitrates and atrazine and some of the other pesticides, insecticides that we see out there. So I think any research in both of those fields, the health side of it, as well as the yields, would be important.
Research. Tuesday, I had the joy of hosting the retired managers, NRD managers came to my office. There was 15 of them. They started this 47 years ago, 48 years ago now. The ones that are still alive, they asked me the issues, what's going on, and I brought up nitrates, and we're still talking about it. They were talking about it. The same arguments are still being made. We talk and talk and talk, and we research and research and research, and we still haven't figured out what the answer is, what we can do. We got a lot of pieces of the puzzle to get them implemented on the ground. So that's what I would encourage, is the research on the best management practices, but relate it to economics and relate it to the effectiveness of controlling nitrates. Because from everything I'm seeing, we heard about the perfect storm. I'm getting closer to thinking it's mission impossible to grow corn on sand. The conditions just for nitrates will not allow it to happen effectively, efficiently. So another research is find another crop. Help us develop another market, another crop. Hemp was brought up. I brought it up to some of the powers that be. And it scares people. It scares the big wigs in charge. It's in the Farm Bill. NRCS can help us there. UNL, you can help us with the research that's needed. But to find us a different crop to grow, that's a very bold statement. I know corn is king, but we're dealing with soils that it's almost mission impossible to get this done without leaching nitrates into the groundwater. So any work there that can get done, I fully endorse and support.
One of the things I've heard and that's been repeated here is the long-term issue of nitrates and so forth. I just want to point out that in 2005, when we started our wellhead protection planning, it didn't take us very long to realize that we can't fix the nitrate problem locally, and that we knew that there was a legacy issue that we had to deal with. And then so the group said, well, we're going to deal with some of these things, but the short-term problem is utilities. It's your problem, so you go fix it. Where did the long-term legacy issue go? Yes, the NRDs have done a great job. They're trying to address those things, but it's really long-term. But where I want to try to bring that back together is, even though that you say you got this legacy out there, there's still things that we need to do, and that is, if you can control the rate at which that 2,000, in our case, 2,000 pounds of nitrogen that's in that vadose zone getting in the groundwater, but at what rate? Can I manage that aquifer? If I can manage it, I can then reduce the cost of providing treated water in here. So one of the innovative things I'd like to see done, and maybe it's just for the Hastings area, but I still don't have a good feel that we understand exactly the recharge rates that are occurring and where they're occurring. We know from modeling how much water is being taken out. We know how much water should probably be coming out of the Platte River. We assume a certain amount that comes from the soils above, but is it uniform? Yeah, that's where the models work and so forth. But we're seeing evidence that just the act of pumping is causing the vadose zone to go under negative pressure. And if that's occurring, then the act of irrigating, act of running a pivot may be driving the nitrates through the vadose zone faster. So then the question is, well, if we can save the amount of pumping, maybe we can reduce the rate at which those nitrates are moving through. So I'd like to see some work done with that respect. I know we heard the only way to get rid of nitrates is pumping it. So I think that all has to fit together.
Needed research. I guess I just take maybe a bit of a different spin on it. We've heard a lot of great things the past couple days, and there's even a lot of stuff that we haven't heard about that's happening and going on at the university level, the NRD level, and even nationally. But as we've heard a bit the past couple days, also is that we need to approach that collaboratively and engage the social sciences and the economics end of that, and figure out how to actually get some of that in the hands and get it used. My dad's a farmer, and I'm a believer in cover crops. But going to him and saying, "Hey, Dad, I think you need to do some cover crops," and he'd say, "Okay, tell me what to do." I wouldn't know where to start. There's so many issues with what crops, what you're selecting, and some legacy impacts from herbicides from the previous year and what you plan to do the next year. And I don't, I'm hoping that maybe somebody at NRCS would know that. But, if there was an app or something like that that can make some of these decisions really easy, then I could put the app on my phone and maybe I'm showing my age with the app, but, put the app on my phone and say, "Here, Dad, here's what you need to do." And he'd go do it. He's not everybody, but, I think making it easy, we've heard that this week. A lot of the technology's there. Yeah, some of it needs to be refined, and we need more of it all the time. But how do we make it easy for people to use? How do we make the Shell Creek kids get this idea in their head, and go to their parents and their grandparents and say, hey, here's what you need to do, and all the science behind it is in this app for what we need to do. So.
Yeah, that's one of the things that not everyone, I learned early on, like 10, 15 years ago, not everyone is like us in this room that thinks science is so cool. We are the outliers when it comes to that. So to make science easy would be really helpful for the rest of Nebraska, I think. So, so I'm, in the interest of time, I'm going to combine a couple of the questions that we have left. I want you to share what is the most important or interesting message you will be taking away from the conference. And then if you can kind of imagine a year or two from now, what would you like to see different, or an action item that, when we already know we're going to be meeting, we're going to have the Water Center Conference in Scottsbluff. We're going to have Water for Food in October. In Lincoln. So what should we be talking about next year at those conferences? What should we be doing differently, or who should we be convening? What is because that's the thing with social marketing. Do I have where's social marketing behavioral economists? We have to set an objective, and we have to say we're going to do it if it's actually going to happen. So let's make it happen.
Well, one of the things that I'll take away, and Ryan just mentioned it, and that was the kids. And I was very familiar with those two programs because the Know Your Well and the Shell Creek projects were two things that the Environmental Trust has funded. But I guess the takeaway from having those guys here, and I'm so glad they came and got in front of everyone, and I know it had to be difficult for them to come into a room this large, because I remember being in high school, and you didn't want to speak to a group of this size for anything. But I think they really enjoyed it, and talking to a few of them afterwards, they really appreciated people being here. But I think the children of the future, you hear that over and over and over. But those are two programs working with water that if we can spread that around, and I know that's really what we're trying to do. The Shell Creek, we want that to spread to other watersheds. The Know Your Well, we're starting out small. We're hoping to spread it across the state. But we're really hoping that those kids in schools all across the state will adopt those programs. And I'm hoping, like Ryan said, that they will then tell their mom, their dad, their uncles, their aunts, their neighbors. When that Shell Creek project first started out, they had trouble getting on people's land. People didn't want out there messing around, just like, I worked for Game and Parks for a number of years, and whenever you say, can I access your property? Nope. They don't want to find that endangered species. They don't know what you're out there doing. And so the kids actually had some problems. But once they got in there, the community found out what they were doing. The community started coming to their programs and started learning. And so it was mentioned, we've got to figure out how to get the word out to the people and to the producers and the everyday people instead of just at meetings like this. And so I think the kids are one way. And then those kids grow up, and some of them are going to return back to the farm and the ranch, and some of them are going to go on to careers, and some of them have gone on to careers already in the water sciences from the Shell Creek project. So having them here, I think, was very important, and that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about the conference was seeing and meeting some of those kids.
I tried to hire some of them last night after they got done. I promised them jobs, so hopefully they continue. The best part of this conference for me was not necessarily sitting here listening to the presentations. It was the networking with the powers that be in this room. Mike Bain, Ron Yoder, Chiron Ray, Craig Derrickson, Marty Link. Those conversations, Tim Greger, I'm not sure where the senator's at, if he's even still here. Really, I got a message that we're all headed in the same direction. We all have the same goal, and we're all willing to be partners with each other to move this from more talk to more action. And so over the last 2 years, I've seen some changes being made, and I hope and continually hope that we make more changes to address this issue. And right now, at this perfect time, the planets are aligned that hopefully we can get some more action on the ground. So, is that all the questions? Yeah. One thing that I encourage UNL, this nitrogen algorithm for recommended rates of nitrogen, this one shoe that fits the whole state, isn't working. Some of the discussions I'm having with producers, they're saying, well, I'm just putting on the recommended rate. And listening to Steve the other day, he's got customers that are at 0.6, 0.5% of the recommended rate, and they're making good money and they're not abusing it. It's a constant thing that comes up. We're trying to encourage people to be more efficient, and they're falling back on the data that UNL is providing. So if we could work on that formula, I don't know how you tweak it, how you make it better, but something that would correlate to sandy soils. And then once again, longer term, let's find another crop other than corn or other than something that's going to need so much nitrogen to grow.
So I guess, my big, the thing that I got most out of this is obviously the talking to people and some of the collaborative effects I think that will happen after we go home and we're sitting in our chairs and we're thinking about some of the cool things that we heard, and we call some colleagues up that we met and we start talking some things over. But I heard this several times throughout the meeting yesterday and today, and probably more than 2 or 3 times, is that it's a people thing. The Shell Creek folks said that, and then Mark said it's very much a people problem. So we have to kind of keep that in the back of our heads as we try to approach this and move forward. And I think the one goal that I would have, short term or long term, and Crystal and Katie are kind of working on this, is coming up with some kind of a statewide nitrate plan, groundwater nitrate plan, not like Iowa's, but something somewhat similar, that would include the marketing component, the engagement component, what financial resources do we need, where are we going to get those financial resources, how many FTEs do different agencies need to dedicate to this, how many FTEs does the university need to dedicate to this, what research is missing, kind of that plan to move forward, kind of like we did in Brazil, but for the whole state. And what's our game plan in the future? Do we need to be focusing on the marketing end? And I think we have enough good minds in this room and around the state that we could come up with that plan. But what's our focus in the future? How's Mark going to focus his money in the future trying to address nitrate? How's our organization gonna focus our money in the future? So I think if we could get a focus and have somewhat of a game plan to move forward, so that we're not going back and forth all over the place, I guess is what I'd like to see in the next couple of years.
Well, I guess one of the things that an aha moment that I had here was, we'd always talked about our long range plans needs to address both groundwater conservation as well as best management practice. But I don't know that I truly understood what best management practice really meant. And I can see that there's lots of little pieces that go to that. Even though water conservation and best management practice are probably just two sides of the same coin with some issues, but things like soil health are parts of that, as well as the economics, not only the economics for the farmer, but also who's paying for the legacy that's out there. And I think the one thing I would ask the university to maybe to look at is try to encourage more of these communities to get out and tell their story. I can tell you that when I go to NRD meetings, a lot of times I just don't realize all the things that we have to deal with. And sometimes when we say it, they're just saying, you're worried about the dollars that are in there. But I think UNL could probably help bridge that gap, because you can say, no, we've already got the science. That I know that when I started doing wellhead protection sampling and so forth, the first thing was, well, it's that big feed yard that's out there that's doing it. But we bring UNL into the equation, and all of a sudden they go, oh, well, it's pretty tough to say that that's what it is, because they could show that it was anhydrous ammonia that's causing the problem. So I would look at UNL maybe reaching out to the consumers a little bit more, maybe through the utilities, through the communities, and say, can we help you bridge that gap when you're trying to get that economic issue from the consumer side, the people that are doing the cleaning of the water treatment issues, so that everybody understands that we all have a cost in this, because this is all one water and we're all responsible.
It's all one water and we're all responsible. So that's a great way to close the conference. I really appreciate that, Marty. Thank you. So with that, I think one of the things that one theme that I think, we are the groupies. People have known me for a lot of years, 25 years. I was with the Groundwater Foundation and worked with Groundwater Guardian. And so I will harken back to those days that it is, and with the NRD system as well, is that it is gets very local, very quick. And the way that you really do take action is to organize, and because it is such a local resource, and it is that wellhead protection area. It is that special protection area that Dave Aiken was referring to, and to understand that specific situation, you do have to get very, very local, very quick, and understand, and the people, and what really affects those people. That diagram that Crystal showed, and that reference, that's a big deal, because what impacts people's behavior is very personal to them. So with that, I think the takeaway for me, and that I want you guys to think about, is from the university perspective. Like I said, our senior vice chancellor is very honest. He wants to hear from you. So do not hesitate to let us know. Do you have what you need to address your issues as you define them? This is another thing, and our colleagues at the Rural Futures Institute, one of the things that, as we were coming up here, this is where it's happening as far as economic development. And so that's kind of the other thing that I take away from this, is that water issues do not define the economics. We're talking about economic impacts, but this region is like the hotbed of Nebraska, So, so do you feel like when you're reaching out, are you thriving, and do you have what you need to achieve your goals relative to what you need to achieve them? And so I think that's where a year from now, where I would like to the conversation to be, what are your goals? Is a certain amount of nitrate contamination okay? I mean, I think that's what we have to address as a state. Are some regions going to have that, and we're okay with that? Or do we want a certain level everywhere? I mean, these are the kind of conversations we have to have, I think. But with that, what did you say? That profound statement? Or did I just trample all over it? I don't know. We're responsible. So we're responsible, I think, and that's what I'm saying. We have to own it. If it's certain amount, it's at certain areas, it's okay. The wellhead protection areas, I think, for drinking water is where the most important. We have to focus. So with that, I would say, everyone, safe travels as you go home. I'm sure we'll do, I guess Jesse will close it out, because there are logistics and a survey, I think, probably. Yeah, okay. Thank you.